Hi everyone. Welcome again to the Ohio City live stream. Just checking, make sure we got all of our audio on today.
Right.
I am Chad Biggers, the Digital Engagement Manager for Ohio City Incorporated. Um, so it's good to see everybody. Whitney, you want to introduce yourself?
Hello. Absolutely. Whitney Long Jones, the Organizing and Engagement Manager. So, for anyone who has caught that, you will see that we have new titles official today. So, we're still the same people. We're still doing the same work, just kind of bringing it together in a more cohesive way. And you'll see us around. Face is still the same.
Absolutely. I'm really excited about it. If you noticed last week, I think I actually had a blank space because I was
Oh, no.
titleless at the moment. But now, today, that is fixed. I am so incredibly excited for today's conversation. If you were able to watch the countdown at all, then you got to see what we're talking about today. I'm going to go ahead and put it back up so everyone can see. Today, we're actually going to have a conversation with representatives from the Lake Erie Native American Council and from the Committee of 500 Years of Dignity and Resistance. Because this week especially, but the last couple of weeks have been really, really big movements forward for a lot of Native issues. And so I'm really excited about that. I also want to talk about this picture that is up on the screen because this is such an important photo for me. That photo is actually my great grandmother, Esther Cheshawala. She was the first Osage woman to join the Marine Corps. She was one of the first Native American women in the Marine Corps. She was one of the few females in the Marine Corps at all during World War II to actually be a pilot and logged over 500 hours of flight time during World War II. And so I love sharing this photo whenever I get a chance to. And I thought today was just going to be a really great chance to share that. Um, so, is there anything else you wanted to say before we go ahead and introduce the guests?
No, well, yes. Let me just throw out there, as we've been having conversations on racial equity, we have used the term BIPOC quite a few times. So we are acknowledging all the BIPOCs as often as we can, which stands for Black, Indigenous, and People of Color. So that encompasses a lot of people who have had to endure oppression and racism and are still dealing with that. So today we're talking about the Indigenous. So I haven't heard too many conversations about this locally, so I'm excited too.
Yeah, absolutely. So, our guests that we have today are Cynthia Connoly, who is an Ohio City resident and a on the executive board for the Lake Erie Native American Council, and then we also have Josh Hunt, who is a Cleveland resident, and he's the vice chair for the Committee of 500 Years. Um, so, how are the two of you doing today?
Good.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's great to talk with my neighbors in my neighborhood.
Absolutely, we're so excited. I am so incredibly excited. I have literally been just like hyped over this all week, so I cannot begin to describe. I'm so happy. Um, yeah, so this week has been a huge week, hasn't it?
Yes.
You wanna go ahead, Josh. You wanna talk about what happened on Monday? Let's go backwards and talk about this. Let's start with Monday. What happened Monday?
Well, what did happen Monday? All the days run together on me now.
They are.
Washington football team.
Oh, that's right. Yes, they put out a formal announcement saying we are changing our racist slur of a name, and we're changing obviously the mascot. We're very, very sorry, Native Americans. We're going to give you half of our money. No, they didn't say that part.
Oh, man.
We're not that fortunate.
Wait a second.
No, but yes, a major public professional sports team announced they're dropping their racist Native American name.
That is.
And
Go ahead.
yeah, if I could add to that, I mean, this is something that was done on the kindness out of Snyder's heart or pressure from the NFL. This has been decades in the making of multiple grassroots organizing efforts by Native communities, Native nations, Native organizers, national Native organizations and nonprofits. This was the blood, sweat, and tears of generations of activism and efforts. And a lot of these sponsors and these Amazon and Walmart and all the Target holding the merchandise, that was a direct result of the pressure of these organizers talking with the shareholders, the stakeholders, explaining to them time and time again why this is harmful to our people, and bringing together that max capacity and amplifying our voice and our message, and understanding that we all have a shared value, that we want to be seen as human beings and not as caricatures of that. So that is one of the reasons why I think this time around has been so successful. And also, a huge hat tip to the Black Lives Matters movement, because if anything from that movement, we realize that racism is systemic and it's rooted in bias in this country that we've all been born into. And that is the same vein that these mascots are operating in, is in that systemic racism, in that bias that our country operates in.
Absolutely. And I think you said, when you talked about that advocacy, you talked about all of that there were just a ton of organizations nationwide that were doing this work, and that's why we actually asked the two of you on, because you represent two of those organizations that we are fortunate enough to have in the Cleveland area. And I was so excited, I jumped right into it without even asking you guys. Can the two of you talk about the organizations that you do your work with, and just real quickly what it is that y'all are working on?
I'll jump in really quick while my internet's still working quite well. I'm having a rough day with my at-home internet today. So I serve on the executive board of the Lake Erie Native American Council. I do work full-time at Policy Matters Ohio. I'm the development director. So that is my 9 to 5. My work with the Native community is my 5 to 9, if you will. And so we are a very grassroots organization. We don't have any full-time staff or bricks and mortar building. We're very community-based, volunteer-based, and the crux of our work is around community building. So a lot of events, culture classes for our youth and our adults, community events, and similar. So we try to bring community together. And then the other side of it is also educate Northeast Ohio on who we are as a modern people. So lots of educational presentations, either at schools, libraries, senior centers, you name it, we've been there. I've also been directly involved with helping develop curriculum with some K-12 schools, as well as advocating, as we will talk today, about the mascot issue here in Cleveland.
Wonderful.
And yes, I am the vice chair of the Committee of 500 Years of Dignity and Resistance, which has been in existence since 1992, when Christopher Columbus's quincentennial was being celebrated in this country. So that was how the organization started, was resisting that celebration and educating the public on the reality of Christopher Columbus and his negative impact on indigenous peoples. And it was at that demonstration that the work branched out into Native American sports mascots, and particularly the Cleveland Indians team. And that's when that work started to eliminate and educate the public on racist Native American sports mascots. Also doing demonstrations in Little Italy on Columbus Day and pushing for the abolition of Columbus Day and hopefully replace it with Indigenous Peoples Day, going to classrooms, speaking to parent groups, and educating the public on various Native issues and Native American history, things like that.
Wonderful. Whitney, do you got any questions? I don't want to take all of the airtime.
That's okay. So maybe not a question, but a comment. I'm glad that you brought up the Cleveland Indians. Can you talk a little bit more about where we are in the process of getting rid of that logo? Because I know there's been a lot of talk of, going back to an older name, the Spiders. Where have your organizations participated in that advocacy? And based on what you know, where are the Indians with that now?
Right now, our organizations, there's several Native organizations in Northeast Ohio, and 4 of us have come together in a coalition to add the pressure that's necessary to get the team to change their name. It's the Erie Native American Council, the Committee of 500 Years of Dignity and Resistance, so 2 of us here today. We also have American Indian Movement of Ohio, and also the American Indian Science and Engineering Society. The Lake Erie Professional Chapter is actually based out of Cleveland, but they represent Northeast United States. They just happen to be here. So we have the 4 of our organizations coming together because we've been fighting against this since at least the 60s, right? So we're now 6 decades and 3 generations into this fight. And we have never been contacted by the team to engage in any type of meaningful discussion. Our pleas and our demands and everything have largely been ignored for over 60 years. And so we decided right now that we are stronger together, and the time is now. So we banded together in this coalition. We call ourselves the Cleveland Indigenous Coalition. And right now, we actually have a sign-on letter circulating around the city of Cleveland, urging businesses, nonprofit organizations, general organizations, anybody who's interested in signing in on this letter to join us in the call for the team to change their name. The goal is to introduce this to Cleveland City Council. They recently passed the legislation declaring racism a public health crisis. And we know that there's a growing body of scientific research showing the direct harm that mascots, team names, and logos have on our Indigenous youth specifically, leading to higher levels of depression, lower rates of self-esteem, lower rates of self-worth, lower like community worth. So them not feeling like they're part of a community, which at Ohio City Inc. is very important in this neighborhood. And also goal setting. They're unable to see a future for themselves. And I think everyone agrees that we all want our children to achieve what they want to achieve, and any goal that they want to reach, they should be able to attain. And so with that scientific research showing that it's harming our communities and specifically our youth, we're calling on Cleveland City Council to uphold their obligation to that legislation and to declaring racism a public health crisis. And the easiest place to start is right on the corner of Carnegie and Ontario. So right across from our neighborhood. And so we're very excited that Ohio City Inc. has joined us in that call. We're very grateful for that. I think Ohio City has an amazing opportunity to join in this call because of our proximity to Progressive Field, and knowing that a lot of the people who go to the games, they frequent our businesses, and just making sure we amplify the message that the time is now, we're stronger together, change the name.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Like to add anything to that, Josh?
I feel like Cynthia is the only one who needs to be here. She did great.
So ditto.
Yeah, I'll just say that, as individuals, we're very driven, Cynthia and I and others in our organization. And I remember getting this fire in my belly of like, I want to do something. So I started talking to the Committee of 500 Years and saying, hey, we have all of this data showing that it's harmful and that it should be eliminated. So let's do something. What should we do? Okay, let's write a letter to Mayor Frank Jackson and ask him to call on the Cleveland Indians to change their harmful racist name. So we wrote up that letter, we sent it to him, and we CC'd all 17 members of Cleveland City Council and made all the points that Cynthia made so well just now. And we got on a teletown hall and we tried to ask the question, given that you've just declared racism a public health crisis, will you call on the Cleveland Indians to change their harmful racist name? And about 8 or so of us were on that call, and not one of us got a chance to ask the question. So that's also why we wanted to form this coalition, to keep that pressure on and to finally get Cleveland City Council to say, to call on the team to change their name. So that's how it started.
Wonderful. I have a lot of things that I want to say, and we don't have time, and so I'm going to lean on the two of you as the experts. And so I'm going to talk about some of the stuff that I've heard from residents and from other people that's having this conversation. This conversation is always, I think, in my experience, it's always been a challenging conversation because there's just a lot of stuff that people just don't know or don't realize, and then the responses to them tend to be very triggering at times. And so, one of the questions I've heard a lot recently, and I imagine the two of you have as well, is last season, I believe it was, they announced the retirement of Chief Wahoo as the symbol for the organization. And so with that happening, a lot of people are saying, so since that already happened, why do we still need to change the name? Can either one of you, I know Cynthia, you just talked a lot about the science behind it. Why is the name itself so important to change, not just the image?
Yeah. So just to be clear, our community has always asked for both the name and the logo to be changed since the 1960s. This isn't something where, the team retires Chief Wahoo and they can pat themselves on the back and say our job here is done, because it's not, because we've always asked for both the name and the logo to change. In addition to the scientific research showing, and that scientific research is not limited just to stereotypical caricatures, it's including team names. And again, to be clear, it's showing direct harm to Native youth, and on the opposite side, showing increased self-esteem to specifically their white peers. So while we're harming Native youth, we're also almost inadvertently enforcing white supremacy to white peers in the same classroom. And this is just not the environment we want our youth to be raised in, and our students and classmates to be raised in, especially when we're talking about public schools. Ohio actually has the largest number of mascots in the entire country. That's from professional team to collegiate down to local school districts and T-ball teams, if you will. So we actually have the largest number. But to kind of expand on that a little more, aside from the very clear research that shows that this is harmful to the name and the logo, there are also studies that have shown that 2/3 of Americans have never met or know a Native American person. And that lack of day-to-day interaction creates this void. I mean, just think of how many things you've learned, just like getting to know different people around you, like different coworkers, neighbors. I mean, diversity is important for a reason, right? We just learn so much from each other and our own lived experiences with them. So most Americans lack that with Native people. They have no idea who we are as a modern people. So that void is created, and then it's filled with pop culture, media, sports mascots, all these toxic stereotypes, and we're almost never viewed in a modern lens. It's very stereotypical, limited ways, as what I call feathered and leathered and stuck in the 1880s. We're never talked about as your coworkers. I'm your neighbor here in Ohio City. So it's very limiting in that way. And the studies have shown that has created a bias, where people were less likely to support Indigenous social justice rights and socioeconomic issues if they had no true idea of who we were as a modern people. So that directly creates apathy towards our community. So when we also have the, bigger fish to fry argument, don't you have more important things to think about, right? Poverty, low educational attainment rates, suicide, drug use, alcoholism. This feeds right into that. The fact that Americans are less likely to support our communities, understand who we are as a modern people, and onto the fact that there is scientific evidence showing that these mascots contribute to those negative indicators.
Yeah, and I'll just add that I always sum it up by saying these mascots perpetuate harmful racist stereotypes. And Cynthia spoke eloquently about the harm there and the scientific evidence. So one of the things that we have to keep in mind here is that a very common sports mascot are Native Americans and all the imagery that comes with that, but also violent predatory animals like tigers, like bears, like wolves. Mm-hmm. So to use and symbolize Native Americans, human beings, in the same way that violent predatory animals are used and symbolized is very dehumanizing and racist, to say the least. I'm not a violent predatory animal. I'm very, very kind and soft. I'm not and cuddly. But that's very dehumanizing in race. That's just perhaps the clearest example, the clearest argument to make that these are bad, these are racist. And you can say a couple other things, that it erases our diversity. The mascots depict us as, but that's very dehumanizing race. That's just perhaps a Great Plains people from the 1800s. Argument to make, and a very small percentage of Native American nations and cultures are of the Great Plains. So it erases us, it erases our cultural diversity. It's sort of like the equivalent of thinking that all European nations are France, or that all European peoples are French, and that's just not the case.
Yeah, there's 574 federally recognized tribes, 574 unique. My husband's language is completely different than my language. Our ceremonies are completely opposite, and his nation is over in Ontario, and mine is in Michigan, and we're that close to each other, but they're still completely opposite. And I think, Josh points a really important thing, just the absolute dehumanization of an entire group of people, a diverse, rich, modern group of people, sovereign nations, right? And creating that complete erasure of us as a modern people is actually the modern form of racism that we're dealing with today, that absolute complete erasure and invisibility. So I give a lot of, as I said in the beginning, educational presentations to schools, library groups and everything. And I always start my talks with, can anyone here name a Native American? And we always get examples of, Squanto, Pocahontas, Chief Wahoo. It's always these historical depictions of who we are. And I followed up with, can anyone name a Native American that's still alive today? And crickets. And I'm standing right in front of them. And so that is kind of the bias that we're talking about, that systemic racism and erasure, that invisibility being the hardest thing that our communities have to overcome. And that ripple effects into very real, tangible, harmful things that our community has to go through. I see this reflected here in Cleveland, absolutely. And anytime I speak with groups and I say I'm Native, my mere existence confuses them. They're like, wait, I didn't realize there were Indians in Cleveland. I'm like, yeah, not just the baseball team. There's actual natives here, and there's a whole history behind that as well.
Yeah, and I do want to ask a question about that. You mentioned that Ohio leads the nation in terms of sports teams with native mascots from from schools all the way up to professional. My question is, where does Ohio rank in the number of recognized tribes within the state?
0. And you actually see that trend of the high concentration and high numbers of Native mascots in states that have 0 federally recognized tribes. There's a number of reasons why. Is that what you want to talk about?
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's like they said, we're not going to recognize any natives unless they're one of our 2 sports mascots.
Yeah,
So
and
that's the only way.
This kind of gets to the whole honor question, right? But we're honoring you, or we're trying to make sure people don't forget about you, which is absurd. Again, we're 574 federally recognized tribes. We don't need mascots to govern the acknowledgement of our existence. If you cannot acknowledge the existence of 574 recognized tribes, that really speaks more to the person's willful ignorance of who we are as a modern people. So that aside, you see a lot of that trends in states with 0 federally recognized tribes. Again, there's a number of reasons why. One of the reasons I like to cite is how mascots actually came to be. Around the 1900s, you'll see that was during the big westward migration of American settlers, and it's also considered one of the great eras of American greatness. The West was won, the frontier was closed, quote, quote. So to Americans, that's a really pivotal, great moment for them. And almost immediately after the turn around the 1900s, they became very nostalgic over that time. Oh man, remember the day where we circled the wagons? And as silly as it sounds, that's what had happened. And if we know anything today, nostalgia sells, and it's a $1 billion industry. And I mean, we have how many Jurassic Parks now, like so many reboots of shows. I mean, it sells and people consume it. And so that's exactly what happened at the turn of the 20th century. And so we had team sports, we had our face put on butter containers, baking powder, motorcycles, helicopters. It just was this huge marketing fad, and it sold. And so that's why you see a lot of this imagery here. But at the same time, you're seeing all this Native imagery, but not actual Native people. So again, that erasure and that invisibility where you're constantly surrounded by Native imagery, but not actual Native people. And so when someone says we're honoring you, and I'm like, no, it was actually just a way to sell baseball tickets. And then on the other side, if you look at our lived experience at the turn of the 20th century, was not a period of greatness for us. Actually, it was probably one of the worst eras of our lived experience. We were herded onto reservations. That was right after the Dawes Allotment Act, where a lot of our reservations were literally diced up and given away to white settlers. So smaller reservations, our children were snatched and forcibly removed from their families and put into military-style boarding schools, where the motto was actually kill the Indian, save the man. So at one side of the spectrum, we have people saying, we're honoring you. We love Natives. You guys are so great and so strong and warriors. And then at the same exact time saying, we're going to kill the Indian and save the man. Which is it? You cannot have it both ways. And because of that, there's absolutely no honor in that.
And I'll just add to the honor bit. How can you claim to honor me and my people when you know nothing about me or my people? And the "we're honoring you" claim rings hollow, especially since over 100 Native American tribes and tribal organizations have been calling very loudly for the elimination of racist Native American sports mascots. So who's really being honored here? The natives that you know nothing about and have been telling you to stop it? Or that glorified, romanticized past of Indian killing and settlers invading indigenous lands? So the "we're honoring you" claim rings hollow to me and false.
I have to agree all the way. And I do have a question. How do you feel about the term Indian? I've always wondered that, and I've never really gotten into a conversation with Native American, right? But I know that some people, some tribes have adopted it just because of the era that we're in. I mean, help me understand that. Yeah.
So Native people have not been able to define who we are and self-govern ourselves until 1975. And when the Self-Determination Act was passed. So that was just a few years shy of when I was born. We had been subjected to 500 years of contradictory federal policy saying who we were and who we were not. And not until this generation have we been able to decide and define on our own who we are as a people. The name Indian, as we all know, is a misnomer. That is a complete mistake on the landing of Columbus, tagging that to where he thought he was. But at the same time, it is something that has stuck and has been generally accepted over a period of time, a way to describe who we are. American Indian, you'll see a lot of organizations that have the name Indian in it, like the National Congress of American Indians, American Indian Science and Engineering Society. And that was just sort of what was given to us over, again, like these decades and centuries of defining us for us. And you see that reflected in several other communities of color. For example, the NAACP still embraces or not embraces, but uses the word colored. But that's not something that we generally talk to our community members with.
Called me a colored person, I'd be very offended.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's these things linger, right? And whether or not we would those organizations are going to shift away from those terms is up to them. But the point is, a lot of people are embracing their individual tribal nations because we are sovereign nations. So I say I'm Anishinaabe or Odawa. And then also the use of the word indigenous, and recognizing that our land boundaries did not end, at the United States boundaries. We also have our brothers and sisters in Canada, in Central and South America. So we're now trending to use the word indigenous. Whether or not I'm offended by saying the word Indian is a whole nother question. And I think that the reason we're discussing it today is because of the use of it with the baseball team, and people ask me if I'm personally offended over the name, and whether or not I'm offended, which I am, but we're talking about a systemic issue, fueling into bias, causing a lot of issues for our community because of the way it's used and who the people are in power that are using it.
And I'll just say that, I mean, yeah, personally, there's problems with both Native American and American Indians. Do you mean people of India? No, I mean indigenous people of the land. Oh, geez. So it's very complicated and everything. And I'm okay with either at this point, American Indian, Native American. But like Cynthia said, I'm Cheyenne. That's the name of my nation, Cheyenne. There's the Northern Cheyenne in Montana, the Southern Cheyenne and the Southern Arapaho in Oklahoma. And we call ourselves the Tsistas, the people. And you'll see a lot of indigenous nations when you say their name in their language, it roughly translates to the people. So I'm not an Indian. We're not Indians. We're the people. And then there's that constant reminder of like Indians. Why do they? Oh, Christopher Columbus. And so it's a reminder. It's a painful reminder of that genocidal history that continues to this day. So there's that.
Yeah, I think I just want to stress that to expect a very diverse, again, 574 tribes of people to come to a common agreement within one generation of what we should be called after 500 years of absolute, again, contradictory policy, law, genocide, epidemics and pandemics. It's just, to expect us to have a firm answer to what do you want us to call you is a little silly. But for the most part, it's always tribal nation first.
Thank you.
We are short on time. There's a ton of stuff I want to say. We're definitely going to have both of you back on to talk some more. And I have one more question that I want to ask you, and that is for both of your organizations, for both LENAC and the committee. How can people get more involved with those organizations if they wanted to? And do they have to be indigenous to be involved, to get involved? Either one.
Yeah, so for the Lake Erie Native American Council, I'd highly recommend liking us on Facebook. You can find us facebook.com/LENAC Ohio, and just follow us there. We have a lot of opportunities for calls for action on a number of things. We are a very small nonprofit. Volunteer opportunities definitely are ample when we have events, which, as you know, most are not happening right now. So unfortunately, we don't need help slinging fry bread at our powwow right now. But be sure to like us on Facebook for when those opportunities do come up. But I will say right now, the biggest way that people can help is to reach out to us either via Facebook or email us, lenacohio@gmail.com, because we do have this sign-on letter circulating. So if you know of an organization or you yourself are running an organization and like, I want to be a part of that. We have amazing leadership already signed on. We have the NAACP of Cleveland. We have the ACLU of Ohio, the Social Justice Institute at Case Western. We have the YWCA of Greater Cleveland. Margaret Mitchell is amazing, is actually one of the main people spearheading the call for the city of Cleveland to declare racism a public health crisis. So we have amazing organizations on board already. Again, we're stronger together. Definitely send an email or like us on Facebook. You can reach us there to join into the call.
Yeah, and I'll say the same thing. You can Google Committee of 500 Years of Dignity and Resistance. You can find our website, but definitely find us on Facebook and look for LENAC and look for the American Indian Movement of Ohio on Facebook, because they and we're always constantly posting things on there. We're posting events like our opening day demonstration, which is next Friday at 5:00, right outside, I want to say, Regressive Field. not progressive.
Okay.
Yeah, you can find us on Facebook because we're constantly posting our stuff there.
Wonderful. And,
I also want to add one quick thing if I can. I have been getting a lot of contacts from alumni at high schools who have had these mascots. And if you are one of those folks that, again, this is a huge wave of awakening, if you will, and moment and like emotion. So if you are an alumni or currently at a high school or elementary school T-ball team with the Native mascot and you want to get it changed, feel free to reach out in any of those venues. And we're currently developing a toolkit that will be helpful for folks like you guys to help encourage your school board, your principal, superintendent, whoever the power that be, to start making the move to change the name.
Wonderful. And I've had the Facebook page for LENAC and then the website for the Committee of 500 Years scrolling across the bottom of the screen during this time, so those have been up there. I will also have them in the description as well as the Facebook for the committee and the Facebook for the American Indian Movement in the video description after we're done with the live feed. I think that is amazing. I think both of these organizations are just doing phenomenal things, and I'm so proud and honored to be able to have the two of you on today to have this conversation. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
I'm so glad to be here and talking with my neighborhood. That is honestly, and I guess that's just something I really want to hammer home is, you have Native families here that, really are pushing for this to be changed. And if you want to know more, please feel free to reach out. I'm right here in Ohio City.
So nice to meet the both of you. We appreciate you coming on today.
Thank you, Whitney.
And I do just want to say, Cynthia, you are our first guest that's ever been on national TV and then also came onto our show as well. So thank you for making time for the neighborhood channel. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, I had to clean up my LinkedIn page there real quick.
All right, awesome. Thank you guys. Thank the two of you so much. Whitney and I are gonna say a couple last updates, and then we'll say goodbye to everybody on Facebook World. So Whitney, again, I did not make an update page because I enjoyed just having the conversation with you about the updates last week. So we're just gonna do that again this week. How's that? Perfect. So my favorite thing to talk about, it's your project, I know, but I love to bring it up because I think it's brilliant. The Ohio City text line.
Yes, and it's so simple. So I appreciate that, Chad. So we know that there's a digital divide out there. So if you're watching this and you do know someone who wants to stay updated but has a lack of access to the internet or doesn't have a computer, share with them this phone number and type the word subscribe, have them type subscribe, and they'll receive weekly updates, things that are going on in Ohio City, Cleveland, ways to become involved. Phone number is 216-250-1919. Text the word subscribe and you'll get weekly updates. And that's for people who have internet too, so feel free to subscribe.
Wonderful. That number is on the screen as well. I'll leave it up there for a bit. Let's see, other updates. Do you have other updates while I'm trying to see if I have any?
Yeah, so the only other thing I wanted to share is our small grants program. We've converted it to a rapid response to address residents who have projects that are promoting racial equity and also addressing needs of people who have been affected by COVID-19. So small grants, we are accepting applications and you have the opportunity to receive up to $250. Every Friday this month by 11:59 p.m., you can email that to me, wlongjones@ohiocity.org, or you can just, maybe I should tell you where you can get the application from first. So email me if you have questions, but then go online to fill out the application, www.ohiocity.org/grants.
Wonderful. That's awesome, and I love that program as well. I love everything. I don't know if anyone is actually tracking this, but I'm pretty sure that this could become a game for a lot of people. How many times does Chad say he loves something, or is it wonderful, or he's excited? Gosh.
Good things. Good energy.
Also, I do want to put this out there for those of you who may have not been paying attention to the news. We are still in the middle of a global pandemic. So please wear your masks. Please know that it is actually mandatory in Cuyahoga County and the city of Cleveland to wear your mask when you go out unless you have a health-related issue. So please do that. And if you're there, I believe we still have our COVID resource list up, right, on the website, Whitney?
Yes.
Yes, so that is ohiocity.org / is that just COVID-19?
COVID-19, that's it.
Perfect. And so there's a ton of resources up there. So please go check that out if you're in need of resources. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. I think that's a really important thing for people to realize. So please wear your masks. And then, I just lost it. It's going across the bottom of the screen right now. If you have any questions or ideas about Ohio City TV, if you're excited about this happening, if you want to see more, you have a wonderful, wonderful guest that we should have on, any of those things, send an email to info@ohiocity.org. Put Ohio City TV in the subject line and it'll get to myself or Whitney. Otherwise, you can also just email me directly at cbiggers@ohiocity.org. So those are my announcements. Did I miss anything?
Nope, I think we're good.
Perfect. All right. Thank you all. Thank you everybody for tuning in. Have a wonderful weekend. Stay safe.
Just Fridays at 3:15.
Absolutely. See you next week.